Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating area, political ideologies. You've shared excerpts from Andrew Heywood's Political Ideologies, an introduction, which is, well, a truly comprehensive guide. It helps us understand the fundamental beliefs shaping political systems, human societies. So our mission today, let's unpack what an ideology actually is. We'll explore the core tenets of some major ones, think liberalism, conservatism, socialism, anarchism, and then we'll see how they interpret key concepts like democracy, even something as basic as human nature. We'll also touch on those provocative discussions around the end of ideology.
That's right. And what's truly fascinating here is how these, seemingly abstract ideas have had such a profound influence on historical events. And they still shape our world today. I mean, from the very origins of states right through to international conflicts, understanding these underlying belief systems, it gives you a real shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. This deep dive should offer you multiple perspectives, really highlighting why these ideas matter.
Okay, so let's kick off then. What do we actually mean when we talk about a political ideology? Our source starts us off with the Marxist view.
Indeed. For Marx, ideology was seen as false consciousness, a kind of delusion, really. It stops exploited classes, specifically the proletariat, in his view, from seeing their own exploitation. It's presented as serving to uphold unequal class power. It literally makes up the ruling ideas of the age. Marx believed it was temporary, destined to vanish once the class system that creates it disappears. The proletariat, he thought, doesn't need ideology. Why? Because it needs no illusions.
That's quite a strong take. But it gets really interesting because our source then broadens out, bringing in non-Marxist views, like Karl Mannheim's.
Right, Mannheim. In Ideology and Utopia, he saw ideologies differently, as thought systems defending a particular social order, expressing the interests of the dominant group. Utopias, conversely, were these idealized visions of the future, implying radical social change. They served oppressed groups. He made this important distinction between particular ideologies, just the ideas of specific people or groups, and total ideologies. Total ones encompass entire Weltanschauung. That's the German word for worldview of a whole social class or historical period. Think Marxism, liberal capitalism, or maybe Islamism. Mannheim argued that all ideological systems are, inherently distorted. They offer only a partial, self-interested view. He believed objectivity that was solely the preserve of the socially unattached intelligentsia.
The socially unattached intelligentsia. But the source then points out, doesn't it, that even their views are shaped by social, cultural factors. Does that sort of undermine the whole idea?
Exactly. That's the challenge, isn't it? It highlights how difficult it is to ever truly escape our own ideological lenses, no matter how detached we try to be. Ultimately, the book defines ideology as this fusion of thought and action. It provides both understanding and, crucially, commitment.
Okay, so with that foundation laid, let's explore how some major ideologies define themselves and key political concepts, starting with liberalism.
Right, liberalism, as a systematic political creed, it really took shape as feudalism was breaking down in Europe. It reflected the ambitions of the rising middle classes. It challenged absolute monarchy, criticized feudal privileges, and pushed for constitutional representative government.
And at its heart, liberalism is all about individualism, right? This core belief that the individual matters most, maybe more than any social group. But here's the so what for you listening. This isn't just abstract. It fundamentally shapes how we view things like healthcare, privacy. It's a constant tension in policy debates today. How does the source break individualism down?
Well, Heywood notes two forms. There's methodological individualism, which means explaining society in terms of individuals, and then ethical individualism, where society is structured to benefit the individual, prioritizing individual rights. Now, classical liberals and the New Right tend to champion egoistical individualism, focusing on self-interest, self-reliance. Modern liberals, on the other hand, lean towards developmental individualism. That's more about human flourishing, self-realization.
They also believe in toleration and diversity, suggesting there's a deeper harmony even between competing interests, like, say, workers and employers needing each other.
Exactly. That harmony extends to their view of the state. Liberalism champions constitutionalism. That's all about limiting government power through external legal constraints. Think written constitutions, like the U.S. Constitution, though Heywood does know practical concerns, like protecting property from democratic power, might have shaped it too. And also bills of rights, like the French Declaration of the Rights of Man in 1789, and they really emphasize the rule of law.
When we talk liberalism, Adam Smith inevitably comes up. How did his invisible hand become such a cornerstone, and what impact did it really have?
Oh, huge. Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations was foundational. He argued the economy works best when government leaves it alone, managed by impersonal economic forces, market forces, supply and demand, rather than the old mercantilism system, this idea of a self-regulating market. It reflects that deep liberal belief in a naturally existing harmony. Some classical liberals, like Herbert Spencer, even took it further, applying social Darwinism, promoting the survival of the fittest to justify inequalities of wealth and power, which certainly had a massive impact on social policy back then.
But then modern liberalism arrived and shifted things, didn't it? Especially with industrialization changing everything. How did that play out?
It was a critical turning point, yeah. Industrialization brought immense wealth, sure, but also widespread poverty and inequality. This made it really tough for liberals to keep arguing that unrestrained self-interest automatically led to a just society. So modern liberals, figures like John Stuart Mill, whose On Liberty is called the heart of liberalism and the source they started advocating for, an interventionist or enabling state. Mill's famous idea, over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. It emphasized not just negative liberty, freedom from restrictions, but also positive liberty, autonomy, self-realization. It was a big evolution.
Okay, so if liberalism championed the individual, conservatism often seems to prioritize tradition, community. Let's pivot now to this ideology. As our source points out, it's driven by a desire to conserve. Heywood highlights its emphasis on history, experience, a skepticism towards abstract reason, often seen as just pragmatism.
Yet it's definitely an ideology. It has a distinctive set of beliefs. A core tenet is the concept of organic society, this idea that humans are dependent, security-seeking, we need to belong family, community, nation. They often reject negative freedom, just being left alone. Instead, freedom is seen as willingly accepting social obligations to counter anomie, that's basically social breakdown, normlessness.
And this organic view, it leads directly to their emphasis on hierarchy and authority, doesn't it?
It does, yes. Conservatives often believe talent, leadership are somewhat innate, that authority develops naturally, like parents with children. It's seen as imposed from above because people need guidance, security, to avoid rootlessness. You see historical examples like Tsar Nicholas's orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality. Continental European conservatives, including, well, those who supported Mussolini and Hitler, were often staunch authoritarians.
Right, so that brings us to different flavors of conservatism, like paternalistic conservatism. How does that look?
Well, the Anglo-American tradition, heavily influenced by Edmund Burke, was more flexible. Burke thought change could be natural, shouldn't be resisted if it helped conserve the state itself. Benjamin Disraeli then developed this into one-nation conservatism. He was genuinely worried social inequality could spark revolution, so he introduced noblesse oblige, the idea that the wealthy, the privileged, have a social duty, a responsibility for the less well-off.
And there's libertarian conservatism, which, hearing you describe the others, sounds almost contradictory.
It really does. And this tradition shows how conservatism got influenced by classical liberal ideas, starting way back in the late 18th century. Libertarian conservatives push for maximum economic liberty, minimal government meddling in social life. They believe liberal economics is compatible with a traditional conservative social philosophy, focusing on authority and duty. It's an interesting mix.
And what about Christian democracy? It seems to sort of bridge some of these ideas.
Christian democracy, yeah, particularly strong in Europe. It came out of the Catholic Church's response to industrialization. It accepts democracy, but worries about unrestrained capitalism. Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum in 1891 was key here, highlighting reciprocal duties of labor and capital. It advocates for a social market economy, a kind of third way blending market competition with social cohesion, solidarity. They see the market as a tool, a means to achieve broader social goals, not just an end in itself.
The source also gets into the New Right, which brought together two powerful, maybe conflicting elements. What were they?
The New Right, hugely influential US and UK post-1970s. It fuses neoliberalism, there's classical liberal economics, free markets, critiquing big government, privatization, supply-side economics, low taxes, fiscal conservatism, with neoconservatism, which is more about traditional conservative social theory. Defending order, authority, discipline, being tough on crime, patriarchal family values.
Wow, that's fascinating how those two very distinct traditions, economic libertarianism and social authoritarianism, managed to combine into such a potent force.
Yes, and this fusion absolutely creates internal tensions within conservatism between neoliberalism and neoconservatism. I mean, think about it. atomism versus organicism, radicalism versus traditionalism, libertarianism versus authoritarianism, economic dynamism versus social order, minimal state versus strong state, internationalism versus insular nationalism. The source even notes neoconservative foreign policy, especially in the U.S., often involved a Manichaean worldview, start good versus evil, and hard Wilsonianism, actively spreading U.S.-style democracy, sometimes by military means, like we saw in the War on Terror.
Okay, let's turn to socialism now, traditionally defined by its opposition to capitalism. What are its core themes? What really sets it apart?
Well, at its heart, socialism sees humans as social creatures, united by common humanity, preferring cooperation over competition. Its central value is equality. They believe equality underpins community cooperation. Socialists argue equal outcomes strengthen social solidarity, and they often criticize equality of opportunity, saying it fosters a survival of the fittest mentality. R.H. Tawney famously called it a tadpole philosophy, implying most don't make it.
And class politics is a huge part of its history, right?
Historically, absolutely. Socialism was deeply linked to the class struggle. Bourgeoisie, the owners, versus the proletariat, the workers. But since the mid-20th century, deindustrialization. Well, it's led to a decline in that traditional class solidarity. So socialist parties have had to broaden their appeal beyond the traditional working class, focusing on issues like gender equality, ecological sustainability, for instance.
So how do socialists aim to achieve their goals? Are there different roads to socialism, as the source puts it?
There are two main paths described: fundamentalist socialism, which is basically communism, and revisionist socialism, which we know as social democracy. Evolutionary socialism emerged as working class conditions improved and democracy advanced. The focus shifted from violent revolution to a parliamentary path. But there's a big risk highlighted. Socialist parties, even if elected, might just win office without necessarily acquiring power. Why? Because of the entrenched interests of big business political elites.
And then there's the more radical path, communism. What defines it in Heywood's analysis?
Communism is defined by a total rejection of private property, a preference for common ownership, and it's most famously linked with Marxism. Marx predicted capitalism would inevitably be overthrown by a proletarian social revolution, establishing a new mode of production, achieving full communism through collective ownership.
The text really shows the tensions within socialism, especially between communism and social democracy. How do they really differ?
Oh, significantly. Communism is often seen as scientific socialism, fundamentalist utopian revolutionary, aiming to abolish capitalism entirely, establish absolute equality, state collectivization. Social democracy, in contrast, often called ethical socialism, revisionist, reformist, evolutionary, gradualist. It seeks to humanize capitalism, achieve relative equality, support a mixed economy. It embraces what Heywood calls a competition state focused on national prosperity in a globalized world, prioritizing education for employability, shaping public attitudes more than just, direct economic engineering.
Right. Let's move to anarchism. Often misunderstood, sometimes caricatured. The source describes its core as being against statist politics, advocating a stateless society, voluntary agreement. What's the reality behind the stereotypes?
Yeah, a common stereotype is that anarchism relies on this naive belief in natural goodness. But anarchists don't actually share one single view of human nature. Many believe humans are products of their environment, but also capable of changing it creatively. And they're deeply aware of the corruption inherent in power itself.
Okay, so what are the main branches?
Well, there's collectivist anarchism or social anarchism. It has philosophical roots in socialism. It stresses human capacity for social solidarity or mutual aid, that's Kropotkin's term, believing people are naturally sociable, cooperative. As Bakunin famously put it, social solidarity is the first human law, freedom is the second law. For them, government is just unnecessary. It replaces freedom with oppression, fundamentally.
So if it has socialist roots, where does it really break from socialism, especially Marxism?
Anarchists completely dismiss parliamentary socialism. They see any state expansion, even by socialists, as just entrenching oppression. Their bitterest fight with Marxists, it's over the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Yeah.
Anarchists see the state as evil, oppressive in its own right, not just as a tool of class oppression. They believe real revolution means overthrowing capitalism and immediately abolishing state power. It can't be allowed to just wither away.
And anarcho-communists take this further, advocating small, self-managing communes.
Yes, exactly. Like medieval city-states or maybe peasant communes owning wealth in common. This, they believe, strengthens compassion, allows direct democracy, keeps things human scale, avoids that depersonalization you get with big states.
Then on the other side, there's individualist anarchism.
This is an extreme form, yeah. Max Stirner's egoism is an example. It condemns all checks on personal autonomy, puts the individual self at the absolute center of the moral universe. American thinkers, like Thoreau in Civil Disobedience, took Jefferson's "that government is best which governs least" and adapted it to "that government is best which governs not at all," prioritizing individual conscience way above political obligation.
Anarchism is also often linked with violence propaganda by the deed. Can you unpack that?
Historically, yeah, Russian populists used that term to describe how acts of violence could show the ruling class was weak, stimulate revolt. However, Heywood's book notes that, in practice, anarchist violence has been, well, counterproductive at best. It often provokes public horror and, paradoxically, ends up strengthening state repression.
Okay. The source also gives us glimpses of other ideologies through their views on democracy. Let's quickly touch on a few. How does fascism see democracy?
Right, fascists. They embrace what's called totalitarian democracy, where the leader has a monopoly on ideological wisdom, party competition, elections. They see that as corrupt. Fascism often views life as this unending struggle. National qualities are cultivated through conflict, conquest. Think Hitler's foreign policy, his idea of Lebensraum, living space. German Nazism specifically was built on racial theories, portraying Aryans as a master race, promoting virulent anti-Semitism. A stark contrast to liberal democracy, obviously.
And nationalism has a very particular view of the nation, doesn't it?
It does. Nationalism really emerged during the French Revolution, viewing the nation as its own master. It emphasizes the nation as an organic community, naturally dividing humanity into distinct groups, distinct characters. The source distinguishes patriotism, a feeling of loyalty, from nationalism, a doctrinal belief in the nation as the central political principle. It also notes the difference between civic nations, which are more inclusive, and ethnic nations, more exclusive, and mentions cultural nationalism, like black nationalism or Hindu civilization. It's worth adding that liberalism generally looks beyond the nation, towards cosmopolitanism, internationalism, often opposing strong nationalism.
Heywood also added a chapter on Islamism in later editions. What does the book say about it?
Islamism reflects that intersection between politics and Islam, often seen as a key example of religious fundamentalism. It's commonly linked to scriptural literalism, like all Muslims accepting the Quran as God's revealed word. The Iranian Revolution in 1979 is presented as an attempt to set up an Islamist government, though it's complex, a mix of theocracy and democracy, with real power staying with the Shia religious elite. Some even interpret Islamist violence through the lens of subaltern violence, drawing on Frantz Fanon, the idea of it being a way for the dispossessed to challenge injustice.
So, with all these complex, often conflicting ideologies swirling around, the source tackles a big question. Have we seen the end of ideology?
That debate that goes back to the mid-20th century. Daniel Bell, for example, argued in the 50s and 60s that a broad consensus had emerged in the West around welfare capitalism or social democracy. But as the source points out, that didn't mean ideologies vanished. It just meant one specific ideology sort of triumphed temporarily. I mean, communism was still deeply entrenched elsewhere, and new ideologies like feminism, ecologism were rising.
And then came Fukuyama's very famous end of history thesis. What was his argument?
Francis Fukuyama, yeah. In his 1989 essay, he argued Western liberalism had basically won, triumphed over all rivals after fascism's defeat in 45 and communism's collapse in 89. For him, the end of history meant the end of fundamental ideological debate. A global consensus was emerging around liberal democracy, market economy, open, competitive politics. The argument was, kind of, that we'd reached the peak of political evolution.
But the source also asks whether reason, or maybe scientism, is displacing ideology. Is there this feeling that as technology and rationality advance, these old belief systems just become irrelevant?
Yes, it sort of echoes Marx's old distinction between ideology and science. This idea suggests rationality, technology make traditional ideologies obsolete. However, the source implies this notion itself might be another form of myth. While we definitely value technology and reason, those underlying ideological currents, the deep beliefs, values, they persist. They continue to shape our world, even if they wear new disguises sometime.
Wow. What a deep dive indeed. We've peeled back so many layers of political ideologies, from their basic definitions to how they see human nature, the state, democracy, and even wrestling with that idea of their end. You can really see how these deep-seated belief systems have shaped societies, driven history, and continue to influence our world. Profoundly, even in ways we don't always see.
It truly does highlight how these frameworks give meaning, give purpose. And understanding their core tenets really offers you a vital lens for navigating today's complex political landscape. They're not just abstract theories locked away in books. They're the very filters through which people perceive reality and organize their societies, often without even realizing it.
So the final question for you to ponder. Despite all the claims about an end of ideology or the triumph of pure reason, do these varied, often conflicting worldviews still secretly drive our politics, our societies, maybe more than we admit? Or are we just putting new labels on the same old battles? Definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.